I want to ask you all one question. If an artificial intelligence looked at thousands of years old stones and said that they were not cut by humans, but by a technology that looks similar to modern machines, would you believe it? Probably not. But just recently, Grok AI analyzed thousands of high-resolution scans from Egypt's famous Aswan granite quarry, and what it found left many researchers speechless. According to the AI, the marks on those stones showed a variation of only 4.3%. It may sound like a small number, but experts say that when a human repeats the same task by hand again and again, a difference of 12 to 20% is completely normal. So, how could these cuts made thousands of years ago be so incredibly consistent? And the most surprising part is that Grok AI reportedly found the closest match between these marks and modern industrial machines, the kind of technology that humans did not invent until the 20th century. Did the ancient Egyptians have access to some lost technology? Has something very important been left out of the history books? Or are we standing in front of a truth that has been ignored for a very long time? In today's video, we are going to look closely at every piece of evidence. And believe me, as the story moves forward, the questions will become much bigger than the answers. So make sure you stay with us until the very end, because what you are about to hear might completely change the way you look at history forever. But before we get into all the details, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. On the banks of the Nile River in southern Egypt, there is a place that has been confusing scientists and historians for many years. This place is called the Aswan Granite Quarry. At first glance, it looks like an old abandoned quarry. Huge stones, unfinished blocks, and the silence of the desert can be seen everywhere. But as soon as someone gets a little closer to these stones, it starts to feel like there is something here that is far from ordinary. First of all, let's talk about the stone on which these marks can be seen. This is not ordinary limestone or sandstone. It is granite. Granite has a hardness of 7 on the MO scale, which means it is so strong that even today it is not considered easy to cut. Some people even say that it feels harder than normal steel. But the surprising thing is not the stone itself, but the marks carved into it. Long curved cuts can be seen across these rocks, and they are almost perfectly spaced. They look as if someone used a giant machine to cut the stone in one smooth motion. In many places, these marks seem to flow into each other like waves. There are no breaks, no disorder, and none of the irregular patterns usually left by handwork. Almost every researcher or tourist who sees these marks for the first time has the same reaction. Are these really thousands of years old? Because at first sight, they look very much like the marks made by a modern cutting machine. For many years, history books and most archaeologists have believed that the ancient Egyptians did not cut this hard granite at Aswan with any mysterious machine. Instead, they used simple diorite stones. Diorite is a very hard rock, and workers are believed to have used heavy diorite hammers to strike the granite again and again until it slowly took shape. Even today, this is the theory that is taught the most. Historians believe that around 20,000 workers were employed in these quarries. About 15,000 of them worked in shifts so the work could continue without stopping. It is believed that the workers struck the stone for nearly 12-hour shifts. This process continued for months and sometimes even years before one large granite block was finally completed. On paper, this story sounds completely reasonable. If thousands of people work together continuously, even a huge task can be completed. But the real question came up when some researchers decided to test this theory themselves. They made the same kind of diorite hammers, invited skilled craftsmen, and struck large granite stones thousands of times in exactly the way the mainstream theory describes. Everyone expected that they might produce the same ancient-look marks, but the result was completely different. The marks made by the hammers were rough, some deep and some shallow. Every strike created a different kind of dent in the stone. In some places, the edges broke away, while in others, the surface chipped apart. There was no equal spacing and no beautiful curved pattern. Now, if we look at the actual marks inside the Aswan quarry, the picture seems completely different. The cuts look as though someone carved the stone by moving a machine in one direction at a very steady speed, long curved arcs, almost equal spacing, and an astonishing level of consistency. Experts say that no matter how skilled a human being is, there is always a small amount of variation in hand movements. People get tired, their grip changes, and the angle of each strike changes. That is simply a natural limit of the human body. But in the marks found at Aswan, that normal human inconsistency is almost impossible to see. This is the point where the old theory and the actual evidence on the stone seem to collide with each other. On one side, history says that all of this was done by thousands of workers using diorite hammers, while on the other side, the stone itself seems to be telling a very different story. What exactly did Grok AI see? When researchers realized that the old theory could not fully explain the marks found in the Aswan quarry, they decided to take a different approach. Instead of relying on human opinions or old assumptions, they handed the entire job over to artificial intelligence. For this, extremely clear and high-resolution three-dimensional scans of the quarry surfaces were created. This technology is called photogrammetry, where thousands of images are combined to build a digital model of the stone that can be viewed and measured from every angle. After that, all of this data was fed into XAI's analytical system, which had been designed to compare the marks left behind by different kinds of tools. The AI was not told in advance that this was an Egyptian quarry or what kind of tools might have been used here. Its only job was to measure the patterns on the stone and compare them with thousands of ancient and modern tool signatures stored in its database. The AI analyzed 847 different cuts found in the quarry. It measured the curve of every cut known as the arc radius and then calculated the angle at which the tool might have entered the stone. After that, it measured the depth of every cut, the distance between two cuts, and the overall consistency of the entire pattern. This was the kind of work that is considered almost impossible for humans to do by hand. But the real surprise came when the report was released. According to the AI, the total variation across all 847 cuts was only 4.3%. At first glance, this number may seem very small, but in the world of engineering, it carries a much bigger meaning. Normally, even if a skilled craftsman repeats the same task again and again, there is always a small difference in every strike. Sometimes the hand moves a little higher, sometimes the angle changes, and sometimes more or less force is applied. That is why even with modern hand tools, a variation of around 12 to 22% is considered completely normal. After all, a human being is not a machine. But here, the situation seemed completely different. Hundreds of different cuts in different places, yet only a 4.3% difference between them. Seeing such a small variation, many people said that it did not look like the work of one worker or even thousands of workers. It looked more like a system that performs almost exactly the same action every single time. The AI also noticed that the entry angles and the spacing of many cuts were surprisingly similar. It was almost as if someone had planned the entire path in advance and then worked on the stone according to that design. That was the moment when this stopped being just an archaeological question and became a debate about engineering and technology. Because if work done by human hands normally shows a variation of 12 to 22%, and here the difference is only for 3%, then the question naturally arises: who made these marks and how were they really created? Which modern machine did AI match? When Grok AI finished its complete analysis of the 847 different cuts found in the Aswan quarry, the next step became even more interesting. Now the AI had to find out what kind of tool these marks matched the most. For this, it started comparing the cuts with thousands of ancient and modern tool profiles stored in its database. These included hand-operated hammers, Bronze Age tools, and even the most advanced industrial machines used today. First, the AI tested the diorite hammer theory, but the same problem appeared once again. Marks made by hammers are usually irregular. Their depth keeps changing and the angle of every strike is slightly different, but the cuts on the Aswan stones appear to have almost equal spacing and a very similar pattern. After that, the AI started examining modern machines that are used today in large factories and industrial sites. The first strong match came from diamond rotary tools. These are cutting tools with extremely hard diamond abrasives on their tips which spin at high speed while cutting through stone. Even on very hard rocks like granite, these tools leave very clean and consistent marks. The second match came from water jet cutting systems. This technology cuts stone using a very high pressure stream of water mixed with special abrasive particles. Its biggest advantage is that it creates very clean and highly controlled cuts. The third and perhaps the most surprising match came from ultrasonic cutting tools. In these machines, the blade vibrates at such a high frequency that the human ear cannot even hear it. But those vibrations help produce extremely precise and controlled cuts. Up to this point, it was only a comparison. But the real shock came when the AI released its confidence score. According to Grok AI, the closest match for these Aswan marks was an industrial rotary cutting process, and it was about 94% confident in that conclusion. Not only that, but the AI noticed one more thing. Across hundreds of cuts found in different parts of the quarry, the entry angle varied by less than 2 degrees. Just imagine so many marks made in different places. Yet the tool entered the stone at almost the exact same angle every single time. Maintaining that level of consistency with human hands is considered extremely difficult. This is where the biggest question appeared for scientists, because the machines that match these marks the most are generally considered products of the modern industrial age. Technologies like diamond rotary systems, high-pressure water jets, and ultrasonic cutting only appeared after the development of the 20th century. There is no historical record of such technology existing during the Bronze Age. So on one side, history says that only simple stone hammers existed at that time, while on the other side, the AI says that the marks look more like the result of a controlled industrial process. This is the point where the entire debate becomes even deeper, a place where a human simply cannot work. But there is one more thing in the Aswan quarry that very few people pay attention to. And to be honest, this part makes the whole story even more mysterious. In different different parts of the quarry, there are deep and narrow shafts that go nearly 30 to 50 feet down. Many of these shafts are only about 3 to 4 feet wide at the top. From above, they look like ordinary holes, but as soon as researchers look at the marks inside them, the whole picture changes. On the walls of these narrow shafts, the same curved and uniform spiral cuts can be seen that are found in the open quarry above. Their depth, their pattern, and their shape are almost identical. This is what surprises scientists the most. Now, just think about it. If the old theory is correct and this work was done with heavy diorite hammers, then a worker would need at least 18 to 24 inches of space to swing the hammer with full force. Only then could enough power be generated to strike a hard rock like granite. But inside these shafts, there simply is not that much room. In many places, a person can barely stand, let alone swing a hammer. Hard granite walls on every side, great depth, limited air, and an extremely narrow space. Working continuously for hours in such conditions seems very difficult by itself. Yet, the marks on the walls of these shafts are exactly the same as the cuts found in the open areas. When Grok AI examined all the data from these shafts, it calculated the width of the space, the angle of the cuts, the hardness of the granite, and the amount of room needed to swing a hammer. After that, the AI reached a conclusion that made the debate even bigger. It placed this situation in the category of impossible due to spatial constraints. According to the AI, if a tool needed a backward arm swing before striking, it could not have worked in such a confined space. But if there were a system that worked directly from the front using vertical force, then it could produce the same type of cuts even in very narrow areas. Up to this point, everything that had come forward was limited to the surface of the stone. But the real surprise began when researchers examined these cuts under a microscope. Because many times something that looks ordinary to the human eye tells a completely different story when it is magnified thousands of times. And the granite at Aswan seemed to do exactly that. Normally, when a hard stone is struck again and again with a heavy hammer, its surface breaks apart. Scientists call this a fracture. Small crystals inside the stone crack in different directions. The edges become rough and tiny cracks spread deep into the material. If a piece of granite is shaped with hammers under a microscope, it looks almost like a tiny battlefield. But in these Aswan marks, the picture was completely different. Researchers noticed that the stone did not appear broken. Instead, it looked as if it had been cut very cleanly. In technical language, this is called a shear pattern. There was a very clear boundary between the cut surface and the untouched surface. It did not look like the stone had been hit with great force. Instead, it looked as though a sharp tool had slowly separated it. The most surprising thing was that almost no damage was found beneath the cut inside the surface. If hammers had been used, tiny cracks should have extended deeper into the stone. But nothing like that was found here. It was almost as if all the force had been applied only at the exact point where the cut was made. And the story did not end there. When these surfaces were examined under even higher magnification, extremely fine spiral patterns became visible. These tiny rotating marks looked as though a rotary tool had moved across the granite while continuously spinning in one direction. In many samples taken from different places, the direction of these spiral patterns was almost exactly the same. Along with this, scientists found some other unusual evidence as well. Very small areas on the cut surfaces showed signs of heat exposure. This is known as thermal alteration. It appeared as though a very high temperature had been created at a tiny contact point. If two stones are rubbed together, the heat normally spreads over a larger area. But here the heat seemed to be concentrated only at a small rotary contact point. Then, under the microscope, researchers also found extremely tiny particles. Among them were corundum particles, which have a hardness of 9 on the MO scale and are used today as abrasives in industrial cutting discs. In some places, carbon structures were also found that many people described as having a diamond-like form. When Grok AI was given all of this microscopic data, the spiral patterns, the clean cuts, the absence of internal damage, the heat marks, and these hard particles, it combined all of these details and analyzed them together. The AI reached a very surprising conclusion. According to it, this pattern does not look like the result of ordinary hammers or Bronze Age tools. The closest match was a process that today would be described as industrial-grade diamond abrasive rotary cutting. In other words, under the microscope, the granite did not appear broken. It looked as though it had been cut with great precision by a modern machine. Why is the timeline running in reverse? When researchers started trying to determine the age of these marks, the mystery became even more complicated, because the results that came out seemed to raise questions about the entire historical timeline. In many places inside the Aswan quarry, old red-colored paintings have been found. These are known as red ochre paintings. The interesting thing is that these paintings are made directly on top of the cutting marks. That means the stone was cut first, and only much later did someone paint these images over it. When these paintings were dated, some researchers suggested that they could be almost 2,000 years older than the early dynastic civilization of Egypt. So, if the paintings are that old, then the cutting marks underneath them must be even older. This period is generally known as pre-dynastic Egypt, a time when, according to mainstream history, small tribes lived there and only simple stone tools were available. But this is where Grok AI noticed another interesting pattern. It compared the geometry of different cuts with their estimated age. This entire study was called temporal precision analysis. The result was surprising. According to the AI, with about 91% confidence, an opposite relationship could be seen. The older the cuts appeared to be, the more precise and uniform they looked. And as time moved forward, the cuts became more irregular. In other words, the marks believed to be the oldest looked the most perfect, while the later ones looked more like ordinary human workmanship. Not only that, but the AI also tested this pattern statistically. According to the report, this relationship reached a 99 percentile statistical significance. That means it did not seem to be just a coincidence or the result of a few isolated examples. The same pattern kept appearing again and again throughout the entire dataset. Normally, in every civilization, technology improves over time. Early work is usually rough and later work becomes more precise. But the Aswan quarry seems to be telling the exact opposite story. Here, the oldest work appears to be the finest, while the later work gradually becomes more ordinary. Up to this point, the question was how ancient people were cutting granite with such precision. But Grok AI's analysis revealed something that made the mystery even deeper. It almost seemed as if those people were not only looking at the outer surface of the stone, but already knew what was inside it. The truth is that granite is not a completely uniform stone. Inside it, there are different layers of minerals. Some areas are harder, while others contain natural weak veins where the stone can be separated more easily. These are known as the internal mineral structure, weak zones, and grain boundaries. In modern quarries, engineers use sonar scanning, ground surveys, and computer-based geological modeling to locate these areas. First, they study the internal structure of the rock, and then they plan the cutting path accordingly so that more work can be done with less effort. But many of the old cuts seen in the Aswan quarry seem to follow these same natural weak zones. It almost looks as though whoever made these cuts already knew which parts of the stone were stronger and where it could be separated most easily. When Grok AI compared the surface mineral mapping with the cutting patterns, it found an interesting relationship. According to the AI, with about 88% confidence, the path of these cuts appears to have been selected according to the internal structure of the stone. In engineering terms, this is called an optimal cutting path, meaning a route where the maximum amount of stone can be removed using the least amount of force. That is why some people also call it the stone reading theory. They believe that perhaps those people had some kind of knowledge or method that allowed them to understand the hidden structure of the stone even before they started cutting it. Why was the unfinished obelisk abandoned? There is one thing in the Aswan quarry that makes almost every person ask the same question after seeing it. If this work was going so perfectly, then why was it abandoned halfway through? We are talking about the famous unfinished obelisk, which is considered the largest obelisk in the world. This massive granite monument is still attached to the same bedrock where it was first carved thousands of years ago. It is estimated that if it had been completed, it would have weighed more than 1,000 tons. Just imagine how difficult it must have been to cut such a huge piece of stone, and then transporting it hundreds of kilometers and standing it upright would have been an even greater challenge. Mainstream archaeology offers a simple explanation. According to them, a large crack appeared in the stone during the work, so the workers abandoned it. At first glance, this sounds reasonable. If such a huge stone breaks in the middle of the process, then continuing the work might seem pointless. But when researchers examined the obelisk carefully, they noticed something unusual. Cutting marks can still be seen even beyond the place where the crack exists. In other words, it appears that the work continued for some time even after the crack had formed. If the crack was the only reason, then the work should have stopped at that very moment. And the most interesting thing is that the marks on this unfinished obelisk are exactly the same as those found throughout the entire Aswan quarry. The same curved arcs, the same equal spacing, and the same precise pattern. Even in the lower section of the obelisk, where there was very little room to work, there seems to be no difference in the quality of the cuts. So, what suddenly happened that caused this 1,000-ton project to remain unfinished forever? History does not give a clear answer. There is no record that the workers ever returned, and there is no evidence that anyone ever tried to restart the work. The same marks are found at the Giza Pyramid in the Valley Temple as well. If this mystery were limited to just one quarry at Aswan, then many people might simply call it a coincidence and forget about it. But the most surprising thing that came out of Grok AI's analysis was that similar marks can also be seen at other ancient sites across Egypt. That means the question is no longer about just one quarry. It becomes a question about an entire civilization. The AI compared the data collected from Aswan with the Giza Pyramid complex, especially the Valley Temple of Khafra, which is considered one of the oldest and most mysterious granite structures in Egypt. This is the same place where enormous granite granite blocks weighing hundreds of tons have been fitted together with such precision that even a blade cannot fit between them. When these surfaces were examined under a microscope, researchers found the same patterns that had been seen in the Aswan quarry. The cut surfaces showed the same clean boundaries, almost no internal fracturing, and tiny curved marks that looked very much like the rotation of a rotary tool. Not only that, but the AI also measured the difference between the cuts found at Giza and those at Aswan. According to the report, the variation between the marks at both locations was less than about 5%. In other words, different places and different stones, but almost the same cutting method. After that, researchers included other granite sites in the Nile Delta in the study as well. Similar marks were found on many ancient stones there, too. And the most interesting thing was that the same pattern seemed to repeat itself once again. The work believed to be the oldest appeared to be the most precise, while the marks from later periods gradually became rougher and more ordinary. When Grok AI combined and analyzed the complete data from the different sites across Egypt, it reached a conclusion with about 89% confidence. According to the AI, this does not appear to be the story of just one location. It seems that at some point in time, the same cutting technology or the same working method may have been used across the entire region. Did Grok AI catch the biggest mistake in history? Now, in the end, the biggest question that remains is this: has Grok AI uncovered the biggest mistake in history? Because throughout this entire story, not just one or two, but several findings have appeared that are not easy to ignore. The AI analyzed 847 different cuts found in the Aswan quarry and discovered that there was only a 4.3% variation between them. Such a small difference is almost never seen in ordinary human workmanship. Along with that, the entry angles of the cuts also showed nearly the same level of precision, staying within about 2 degrees of each other. Then, when these marks were compared with modern machines, the closest match was found with an industrial rotary cutting system, and the AI was about 94% confident in that result. But perhaps the strangest finding was what the AI called temporal inversion. According to its analysis, the oldest cuts appear to be the most precise, while the later cuts look rougher and less refined. This pattern was recorded with nearly 99 percentile statistical significance. In other words, it does not seem to be just a coincidence. On the other hand, the long-accepted theory of diorite hammers does not fully match these findings. Even after practical experiments, researchers could not reproduce marks that looked like the ones found in the actual quarry. Perhaps that is why the debate continues even today, and many scientists seem reluctant to give a clear answer. In the end, archaeology is left with one of its biggest questions. If the oldest people were actually the most advanced, then what happens to our entire understanding that technology improves over time? Is our historical timeline incomplete, or is there a missing chapter that we still have not discovered? And perhaps that is exactly why this mystery has still not come to an end. The stone is still there, the marks are still there, and that 4.3% number is not asking anyone for answers anymore. It almost seems to be taking the answers away from history itself. If you also feel that many secrets of history are still hidden, then subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you can be the first to watch more mysterious and astonishing discoveries like this.